When people speak of creation myths, they often begin in the halls of Olympus, in the Garden of Eden, or in the poetic chaos of Norse worlds. Western and Near Eastern stories have long dominated global imagination, reinforced through books, films, and academic texts. Yet across the vast and diverse continent of Africa, humanity's cradle, exist some of the most spiritually profound, complex, and ancient creation myths ever told. These myths are rarely taught in schools or depicted in mainstream media. Their stories are seldom honored as foundational worldviews, but they are, and they deserve to be heard. Far from being mere folk tales or tribal superstitions, African creation myths are rich cosmological systems, passed down for generations through sacred oral traditions. They are deeply philosophical frameworks that reveal how African civilizations saw the world, not just its origins, but its purpose, its balance, and the invisible relationships between the divine, the human, and the earth. These stories are not fictional relics from a forgotten time. They are living archives of meaning, culture, and spiritual identity. They were, and still are, used to understand suffering, define morality, legitimize leadership, and anchor the soul in the sacred rhythm of existence. In this exploration, we'll dive into three of Africa's most powerful and enduring creation myths, those of the Yoruba, the Igbo, and the Edo peoples. These aren't just narratives of how the world began. They are sophisticated theologies that hold entire philosophies about destiny, justice, harmony, and the sacred nature of life itself. The Yoruba creation story tells of Olodumare and the descent of Orisha to shape the earth. The Igbo myth reveals how Chukwu breathed the world into being through balance and duality. And the Edo people speak of Osanobua, who sent his children from the heavens to lay the foundations of kingship, death, wealth, and spiritual choice. These myths are not just myths, they are mirrors, reflecting how African societies have understood their origins, duties, and divine connections for thousands of years. They are blueprints that continue to shape cultural identity, spiritual practices, and moral values. In telling them, we do not look to the past with nostalgia, we awaken a truth that has always been alive, waiting to be remembered. In African societies, creation myths were never just stories told to entertain around the fire. They were, and continue to be, profound systems of meaning, intricately woven into the very fabric of spiritual life, communal structure, and moral law. These myths functioned as the foundational texts of entire civilizations. They explain not only how the world came into being, but also why it functions the way it does, how humans should live within it, and what their duties are to each other, to nature, and to the unseen forces that govern existence. To understand an African creation myth is to understand a people's values, fears, aspirations, and understanding of the divine. Spiritually, these myths formed a sacred bridge between the human and the divine. They established the original covenants between people and their gods, between ancestors and descendants, between the earth and its caretakers. The Yoruba, for example, see the Orisha as divine intermediaries, forces of nature and morality through whom humans communicate with Olodumare, the supreme creator. In Igbo belief, Chukwu is both transcendent and immanent, present in the world but far beyond it, while Allah, the earth goddess, is the moral compass guiding justice and balance. These myths encode not just cosmologies, but spiritual instructions on how to live in harmony with creation. Worship, ritual, and daily conduct are all rooted in these origin stories, which define the divine order and the consequences of violating it. Communally, creation myths serve as binding agents. They unite clans, justify leadership structures, and designate sacred spaces that reflect the mythical origins of a people. The Yoruba see Ila Ife as the spiritual and physical center of creation, a belief that lends legitimacy to the city's historical and political authority. Among the Edo, the descent of Osanobua's children from the sky explains not just the existence of humanity, but the foundation of monarchy, wealth, death, and the moral challenge of free will. In such societies, kingship is not simply political, it is cosmological. A king is seen not only as a ruler, but as a spiritual representative whose authority is validated by myth. These stories also define sacred geography. Rivers, mountains, and groves are more than natural features. They are manifestations of divine events and thus demand reverence and protection. What's especially powerful about African creation myths is their transmission. Unlike the written scriptures of the West or the detailed cosmologies of ancient Asia, African myths have survived primarily through oral tradition. Elders, griots, priestesses, and spiritual leaders function as living libraries, guardians of cosmic memory, interpreters of ancestral truth. The act of telling these stories is itself sacred. It is a performance of identity and continuity, a ritual that links generations across centuries. These oral traditions are not static recitations. They are dynamic, often adapted to the times, yet always rooted in a deeply revered cosmological structure. This oral transmission emphasizes relationship over rigid doctrine, wisdom passed from mouth to ear, spirit to spirit. When contrasted with Western and Asian myths, African creation stories stand out for their relational depth and ecological integration. While Western myths often center on a fall from grace or a punishment-driven god, and Asian myths sometimes focus on cycles of time and reincarnation, African myths consistently emphasize balance, responsibility, and the sacredness of communal life. There is no sharp separation between the spiritual and the earthly in these narratives. The world is not a flawed exile or illusion, but a sacred space to be respected and stewarded. African cosmologies teach that human beings are not masters over creation, but participants in a living web of existence. In short, creation myths in African societies do more than explain the past. They define the present and shape the future. They are blueprints for living, for governing, for believing. They are the invisible architecture behind rituals, laws, and relationships. In every proverb, in every festival, in every prayer whispered to the ancestors, the creation story is present, guiding, teaching, and reminding people of who they are and why they matter. These myths are not remnants of a forgotten time. They are the soul of a civilization, spoken aloud. In the rich spiritual cosmology of the Yoruba people, creation begins not with violence, chaos, or a punitive god, but with a supreme force of order and harmony known as Olodumare. Often called the Almighty or the Supreme Being, Olodumare is the source of all existence, eternal, formless, and beyond full human comprehension. Unlike the anthropomorphic deities of some traditions, Olodumare does not directly rule the world through intervention, but instead delegates creative and administrative functions to a pantheon of divine forces called Orisha. These Orisha are not lesser gods in a hierarchical sense, but rather unique expressions of Olodumare's power, each embodying distinct, natural, ethical, and cosmic principles. According to the Yoruba creation myth, the earth as we know it did not always exist. In the beginning, there was only a vast, watery realm below the heavens. It was Olodumare who decided that the earth should be formed, and for this sacred task, he appointed Obatala, one of the eldest and wisest Orisha. Obatala, known for his calm demeanor and sense of order, was given a chain made of gold, a snail shell filled with sand, a white feathered chicken, and a palm nut. With these items in hand, he descended from the heavens using the golden chain, lowered from the sky to the great expanse of water below. Upon reaching the watery void, Obatala poured the sand from the snail shell onto the ocean's surface, and the white chicken began to scratch and scatter the sand in all directions. This action formed land, spreading out into what would become the earth. Where the sand gathered, hills rose. Where it was thin, valleys formed. Once the land was stable, Obatala planted the palm nut, which immediately grew into a mighty tree. Its seeds destined to spread and populate the world with vegetation. The first landmass thus created was Ila Ife, regarded by the Yoruba as the spiritual and physical center of the world, the navel of the earth, and the cradle of humanity. But the story does not end with a perfect creation. In a moment that introduces profound moral complexity, Obatala made a critical mistake. While preparing to create human beings out of clay, he consumed palm wine and became intoxicated. In his drunken state, he molded some humans imperfectly, resulting in people born with physical disabilities. When he sobered and realized what he had done, Obatala was overcome with remorse. He vowed never to drink again and took responsibility for those he had created. This part of the myth is deeply significant, as it not only explains the existence of physical differences, but also instills a sacred dignity in all forms of human life. In Yoruba philosophy, individuals born with disabilities are not cursed or lesser. They are directly touched by Obatala, under his divine guardianship. After Obatala's initial act of creation, Oduduwa, another powerful Orisha, descended and helped organize the earth further. In some versions of the myth, Oduduwa completes what Obatala had left undone, leading to rivalry and tension between their followers. Yet both Orisha are seen as essential architects of the world, and their dual roles illustrate a recurring Yoruba theme, that even in divine action, collaboration, error, and redemption are ever present. Central to Yoruba cosmology is the belief in Ayanmo, or destiny. Every soul is thought to choose its path before birth in the presence of Olodumare, selecting its life mission, challenges, and eventual end. This pre-birth agreement is why Yoruba spiritual systems place such emphasis on Ifa divination, a sacred practice used to interpret one's chosen destiny and stay aligned with it. The Orisha serve as guides and protectors, helping individuals fulfill their Ayanmo through rituals, offerings, and moral discipline. No one is above the natural order. Even the gods themselves are bound by certain cosmic laws. The myth also emphasizes harmony with nature, a reflection of the Yoruba's deep ecological awareness. Each Orisha is linked with elements of the natural world: Yemoja with rivers, Sango with thunder, Oya with wind, and Osun with fertility and sweetness. To respect nature is to respect the divine. Rivers, forests, and stones are not seen as inert matter, but as sacred spaces housing the divine presence. This worldview engenders a deep respect for environmental balance and the interconnectedness of all life. The cultural impact of the Yoruba creation myth extends far beyond philosophy. It manifests in rituals, names, art, and daily behavior. Naming ceremonies often reflect spiritual lineage, with children named after Orisha or spiritual conditions surrounding their birth. Annual festivals reenact the descent of the Orisha, honoring their roles in shaping the world and maintaining its balance. Masks, dances, and oral chants are used not just for celebration, but as acts of remembrance and reactivation of the sacred past. Ancestral reverence is another direct outcome of the creation myth. Since humanity was divinely crafted, the ancestors are seen not as gone, but as present in spirit, deserving of offerings, consultation, and respect. The Egungun masquerade is a vivid example, where ancestors are honored through elaborate masked performances, ensuring their blessings and guidance for the living. Perhaps most compelling is the way the Yoruba creation myth handles imperfection. Unlike narratives that attribute flaws to sin or punishment, the Yoruba story accepts human imperfection as a consequence of divine error, then reframes it as sacred. This creates a spiritual worldview grounded not in guilt or shame, but in accountability, humility, and the dignity of all life. It teaches that even gods can make mistakes, and that responsibility lies in recognizing and responding to those errors with care and reverence. Through this powerful myth, the Yoruba offer more than an origin story. They offer a vision of the universe where creation is an ongoing, participatory act, a dynamic balance between the divine, the human, and the natural. It is a cosmology that dignifies all forms of existence, celebrates diversity, and invites each person to walk in harmony with their destiny, their community, and the sacred world around them. In the sacred cosmology of the Igbo people of southeastern Nigeria, creation begins not with the dramatic descent of gods or cosmic warfare, but with a presence, serene, vast, and ungraspable, known as Chukwu. Chukwu, sometimes called Chiniki or Chi-Ukwu, the Great Spirit, is the supreme source of all existence. Unlike anthropomorphic gods that interfere daily in mortal affairs, Chukwu is distant, yet ever-present, all-powerful, yet not bound by form. He is the silent architect of the cosmos, the breath behind all things. In Igbo thought, Chukwu is both the creator and the sustainer, the spark of origin and the invisible thread that runs through every aspect of being. Though Chukwu created the universe, he did not craft it alone. A vital partner in creation is Allah, also known as Ani, the earth goddess and one of the most revered deities in Igbo spirituality. Allah is not simply the ground people walk on. She is the soul of the earth itself, the embodiment of fertility, morality, and ancestral law. As Chukwu crafted the cosmic framework, it was Allah who gave shape and moral structure to the human world. She is the womb from which all life emerges and the grave to which all life returns. To live well is to live in alignment with Allah, and to violate her laws is to invite both social dishonor and spiritual imbalance. According to Igbo tradition, human beings were created from clay, shaped with intention by the divine, and infused with life through Chukwu's breath. But the Igbo understanding of humanity goes beyond individual formation. Every person is seen as a composite of spirit, body, ahu, and ancestral essence, endu. The chai is a personal spiritual guide, a fragment of the divine that chooses one's destiny before birth. This belief reflects a deeply individual yet interconnected worldview, where each person carries their own divine contract, yet lives in constant relationship with family, community, ancestors, and the natural world. The Igbo cosmos is built on a principle of duality and balance. Night balances day. Male complements female. The physical and the spiritual are not separate realms, but intertwined realities. Life and death are not endpoints, but phases in a continuous spiritual journey. Reincarnation, or Ilua, is central to this belief system. Ancestors return through children, and families often name newborns after those who have passed, recognizing the soul's ongoing journey through time. This belief doesn't merely comfort the living, it reinforces the importance of moral behavior, knowing that one's actions echo across lifetimes and generations. At the heart of the Igbo creation myth is a deep ethical code rooted in harmony with Allah and Chukwu. Justice is not only a civic matter, but a spiritual mandate. Offenses such as murder, theft, incest, and betrayal of oaths are considered abominations, sins against Allah that require ritual cleansing and public atonement. But ethics are not enforced through fear of divine wrath. Rather, they are maintained through a communal commitment to balance, honor, and accountability. The family, or umuna, is sacred, both as a biological and spiritual unit. Ancestors are ever-present members of the family, consulted in rituals and protected through libations and offerings. The elder's voice carries divine weight because age is seen not just as a function of time, but of proximity to the ancestors and the source. Perhaps one of the most profound aspects of the Igbo creation story is the reverence it fosters for land and nature. To the Igbo, the land is not a commodity. It is the body of Allah herself. Farming, hunting, and building are not economic acts. They are spiritual interactions that must be conducted with humility and gratitude. Sacred groves are protected, trees are not felled without permission, and certain animals are taboo because of their spiritual significance. The land sustains not only the body, but the lineage, housing ancestral spirits and future generations alike. To defile the land is to wound the very source of life. Igbo cosmology, therefore, is not a closed myth frozen in the past. It is a living, breathing philosophy. It governs naming ceremonies, marriages, burials, and market days. It influences how conflicts are resolved, how leadership is chosen, and how the seasons are celebrated. Even in the diaspora, traces of these beliefs endure, subtly shaping communal ethics, family ties, and spiritual intuitions. What sets the Igbo creation myth apart is its serene wisdom. There's no emphasis on punishment or exile, no original sin or divine jealousy. Instead, it speaks of interconnectedness, personal responsibility, and cyclical rebirth. It teaches that the divine spark is not only above but within, and that to live rightly is to walk with both Chukwu and Allah in one's heart, honoring the breath that made you and the earth that holds you. In this myth, we find not only an origin story, but a lifelong roadmap. It teaches that humans are not fallen beings needing redemption, but sacred vessels of spirit needing alignment. The world is not cursed, it is holy. And the path to fulfillment lies not in domination or conquest, but in relationship, memory, and reverence for the seen and unseen alike. Among the Edo people of the Benin Kingdom in present-day southern Nigeria, the story of creation is woven with nobility, cosmic order, and the sacred inheritance of divine lineage. At the heart of their myth is Osanobua, the supreme god and creator, revered as the embodiment of peace, balance, and destiny. Osanobua, unlike many storm-wielding or wrathful deities in other traditions, is serene and wise, a divine father whose will is not authoritarian but purposeful. He resides in the sky realm, a place of spiritual completeness, and from this elevated plane, he looks upon the earth not with judgment, but with intention, setting into motion the descent of his divine children to begin the process of creation and human governance. The Edo creation story begins when Osanobua decided to populate the earth with life and intelligence. From the celestial heights, he sent his children down to earth, using a mystical ladder from the sky to bridge the divine and terrestrial realms. These children were not ordinary beings, they were cosmic archetypes, each assigned a sacred function to maintain the harmony and complexity of life. Their names and roles reflect deep Edo philosophical beliefs about the forces that govern existence. Among them were Oba, Olokun, Ogiwu, and Isu, each symbolizing a core element of human experience. Oba, who would later come to symbolize the royal lineage of Benin, was entrusted with kingship and governance. He represents leadership, order, and the authority of divine mandate. The role of Oba in the myth is not merely symbolic. It forms the spiritual foundation of the Benin monarchy, where the king is seen not as a secular ruler but as a divine intermediary, carrying the spiritual legacy of Osanobua's own children. The Oba of Benin, even today, traces his lineage back to this sacred myth, and his coronation rituals echo the original descent from the heavens, connecting the living ruler with the cosmic blueprint of divine kingship. Olokun, another of Osanobua's children, was granted dominion over wealth, oceans, and abundance. Often associated with the sea, Olokun embodies the mysteries of the deep, the flow of resources, and the ebb and tide of fortune. In Edo belief, Olokun governs prosperity not just materially, but spiritually, teaching that wealth must be pursued with reverence, discipline, and respect for balance. Olokun's watery domain is also symbolic of the subconscious, of hidden power and the generative force of nature. Then comes Ojiwu, the force of death and transition. Ojiwu's inclusion in the divine descent reflects the Edo recognition that death is not an accident, but a necessary dimension of life. He is not feared in the same way Western cultures fear death, but respected as a gatekeeper, a divine functionary who ensures that life remains dynamic, that souls fulfill their purpose and return to the source. In Edo cosmology, death is not final but cyclical, a return to the beginning, part of the same divine rhythm that governs birth and rebirth. Finally, there is Esu, often misunderstood or misrepresented. Isu is not a devil or malevolent trickster, as colonial interpretations once claimed, but the divine messenger and mediator, the principle of choice, unpredictability, and human agency. Esu delivers offerings to the gods, translates divine language, and introduces complexity into human decision-making. He is the embodiment of free will and moral consequence. Through Esu, the Edo people express the philosophical idea that while destiny is divine, how one walks that path is subject to human will. Esu reminds people that every decision has weight, that even in a divinely ordered world, agency is sacred. The Edo creation myth is not only cosmologically profound, it is culturally embodied in rituals, symbols, and art. Particularly in the historic kingdom of Benin, the Benin bronzes, globally recognized for their artistic brilliance, are not mere decorative objects but sacred documents, visual narratives of myth, lineage, and divine descent. They depict the Oba surrounded by court officials, Orisha-like figures, and celestial motifs, reinforcing the idea that the monarchy and its people are part of a divine continuum. Every coronation, every royal festival, every sacred grove and ancestral shrine echoes back to the moment when Osanobua's children first stepped onto the earth. This myth also teaches a dual philosophy of destiny and duality. The world in Edo thought is a balance of visible and invisible, order and chaos, life and death. While Osanobua designs the framework of existence, humans live within it with freedom, responsibility, and consequence. One's destiny, Iwa, is chosen before birth, but how one navigates it, how one chooses to honor the gods, respect the ancestors, and uphold moral integrity, is up to the individual. This philosophical balance between divine structure and human freedom gives the myth an enduring relevance, speaking to the tension between fate and choice that remains central to human experience. In the Edo origin story, we don't find a distant god hurling lightning or punishing sin. Instead, we find a creator who entrusts his own children with the task of shaping the world. We see a universe built not on conquest or exile, but on cooperation, hierarchy, and sacred purpose. And in that universe, every aspect of life, from leadership and wealth to mortality and decision-making, is infused with spiritual meaning. The Edo myth is not simply a tale of beginnings, it is a code of destiny, a spiritual constitution, and a timeless reminder that to live well is to live in conscious relationship with the divine roles bestowed upon us all. In African societies, creation myths were never fossilized texts locked in the past. They were and still are living systems of ethics, shaping not only how people see the world, but how they live in it. These myths function as moral compasses, deeply embedded in laws, customs, social norms, and personal behavior. Whether among the Yoruba, Igbo, or Edo, these stories offer far more than origin tales. They serve as dynamic frameworks for justice, responsibility, and relational harmony. They inform how communities respond to conflict, who holds power, and how respect is shown across generations. They are the unwritten, but widely honored constitutions of the people. Embedded within each myth is a code of behavior: reverence for ancestors, compassion toward community, stewardship over nature, and commitment to one's destiny. Respect for elders, for example, is not just social etiquette, it is spiritual duty, grounded in the belief that elders are closer to the ancestral realm. Respecting nature is a sacred act because natural elements like rivers, trees, and animals are viewed as extensions of divine creation. And destiny, chosen before birth in many African cosmologies, is not a burden but a sacred trust that each person must honor and fulfill. These myths also serve as mirrors of identity, offering individuals and communities a reflection of who they are, where they come from, and why their existence matters. They bind people not only to the gods but to each other, uniting families and ethnic groups through shared symbols, sacred places, and moral stories. They affirm that life is not random, but purposeful, and that each person is part of a grand cosmic design. In shaping ethics, relationships, and heritage, African creation myths do not simply tell us where life began. They show us how to live it with meaning, dignity, and sacred awareness. In a world where modernity often pulls us away from ancestral wisdom, African creation myths stand as powerful tools for cultural revival and spiritual grounding. These stories matter today because they are not just reflections of the past. They are pathways back to identity, purpose, and rootedness in a time when many feel increasingly disconnected. For centuries, colonial narratives marginalized African cosmologies, branding them as primitive or superstitious, while elevating foreign mythologies as the sole bearers of truth. But a growing movement of decolonization, of thought, culture, and spirituality, is now urging people of African descent, and others who value indigenous knowledge, to reclaim these sacred stories and the deep wisdom they hold. Their modern relevance cannot be overstated. In a time of ecological crisis, African creation myths call for a return to balance with nature, teaching that the earth is not a resource to be exploited, but a sacred being to be respected. In a world fractured by individualism, these myths offer a communal vision, emphasizing kinship, elder wisdom, shared destiny, and mutual care. And in societies struggling with ethical decay, they provide a moral framework rooted not in fear of punishment, but in harmony, accountability, and cosmic order. Spiritually, these myths offer resilience and meaning amid modern chaos. They remind us that life is not accidental, that each person carries divine essence and purpose, and that struggles are part of a larger journey shaped by destiny and ancestral guidance. In reconnecting with these stories, people are finding more than cultural pride. They are finding soul-level orientation, a way to walk with dignity, clarity, and reverence through the uncertainties of contemporary life. African creation myths still matter because they have always mattered. They carry truths not only about where we came from, but about how we can find ourselves again. These stories are not lost. They are not buried relics in forgotten temples or echoes fading into the wind. They are still alive, in the songs of elders, in the rhythms of rituals, in the names we carry, in the ways we see the world. The creation myths of the Yoruba, Igbo, and Edo peoples are not just folklore. They are sacred philosophies, complex cosmologies, and timeless codes of life. They remind us that our origins are not limited to pain or exile, but rooted in divine intention, in sacred balance, and in a profound relationship with the universe around us. In revisiting these myths, we're not just telling stories, we are restoring memory. We are reclaiming a spiritual heritage that colonialism tried to erase, and reconnecting with the beauty, dignity, and depth of African thought. these myths still have work to do. They still have people to guide, generations to heal, and futures to inspire. If this journey into the heart of African creation myths has opened your eyes or stirred something deep within you, I invite you to like this video, share your reflections in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Together, let's keep these sacred stories alive, for us, for our ancestors, and for those yet to come.